This is a parts list sent to me by a viewer for a $1,500 build, and they're wanting feedback. And I get emails like this all the time, and quite frankly, I don't have the time to give that one-on-one feedback on a regular basis. But from time to time, if it's been long enough since I did a build guide video, I will take one of these, look at it in depth, and we make a video out of it. I'll be looking at not just individual part choices, but also the thought process behind making decisions on your PC build so that you're not stuck into following a certain price. Because I know before I knew a lot about this, I would look up a build guide, but one part, the price is very different when I was looking at the build guide versus when they made the build guide. So if that part's a bad deal, now what do I do? So it's important to understand the thought process behind this. And I'll be looking at that. I'll also point out a lot of big mistakes people make. One huge mistake people make is not selling their old parts to fund their upgrade. And today's sponsor, Jawa.gg, is a place where gamers buy, build, and sell. You can list your own parts, manage the listings yourself, or you can even take the most convenient route and get an instant offer for your GPU from Jawa. As well as you can look for pre-built systems that fit your budget if you end up deciding this whole like build everything, pick all the parts yourself is getting a little bit too much for you. And again, you can take a look at the used market because while prices I focus on this video are going to be new prices, honestly, guys, a lot of times the best deals are in the used market, and Jawa.gg can help you out there. Also, I can get you $10 off your first purchase at Jawa using code OWEN10. Follow the link in the video description and or pinned comment. Also, they have a Discord community with over 10,000 members, and getting that one-on-one discussion going with other PC building enthusiasts can be a great way to get that one-on-one feedback that a lot of people are looking for, because I can't do one of these big build guides for everybody. So again, follow the link to Jawa in the video description and or pinned comment. Now, like I said, in this video, we'll be focusing on new pricing, and we'll be going through the entire thought process of building the PC. This is the one that was sent to me by a viewer, came out to about $1,500. So what do I think about this? Well, I think if they build this, they're going to be reasonably happy. They'll get a good gaming PC. It will play games well. But I think at this price, we could either deliver the same performance for less money or a lot more performance at the same price, or we could deliver, actually, I think more performance for less money. But what do I mean by performance? When you're picking all of these parts, where should you prioritize? So this is where I think a lot of people go wrong, and my biggest thought process in this build is I think for a gaming-focused build, they're spending too much on the CPU compared to the GPU. The two most important components in a PC build are the CPU and the GPU. When you're gaming, one of those two is going to be the primary limiting factor on the performance of the game. Now, the CPU can be more important if you are an esports gamer, to where you would generally turn graphics settings and resolutions down as low as possible to chase insanely high frame rates. That's a bit of a niche, though. I know it's popular. I'm going to go for a more balanced situation here where you're probably playing some single-player games, or even if you're playing competitive games, you're maybe not turning down all the graphics settings all the way for that competitive edge, but you still want a high frame rate, and you'll still be competitive. In which case, you're often GPU limited, and so allocating more of the budget towards the GPU can be important. Also, the CPU choice you make also impacts the motherboard that is compatible with that. And not all motherboards are going to have the same amount of upgradability in the future. So I think I'm actually going to start us with the CPU choice here, because that's the thing that I think I have the biggest question mark on. It's not that the 13700K isn't a great gaming CPU. You'd be totally happy with its performance, but it's at $370 right now. Now, if you're looking up CPU performance, it would be good to look at one of the latest reviews of one of the latest generations of CPUs to get an idea where things are falling relative to that. They'll usually look at, not just the one they're reviewing, but other recent CPUs and see where they fall. So, for example, If I pull up a recent review, like a 14600K review, that's a recent release. This is from Tech PowerUp, but there's tons of other reviews you could have looked up. What I like with Tech PowerUp is they'll usually set a percentage scaling. So they got their 14600K set at 100% baseline. So now you can look at how other things stack up. So you can see that like, a 13700K, like we're seeing this person chose here, is within a few percent of that performance, right? So we're in the same kind of ballpark as a 14600K. But what I'm noticing here is, see, you can go down and lose just a few percent performance. Like, what if I go down to like a Ryzen 5 7600X? We're reaching 95% of the gaming performance. And also, one other side note on CPUs. In gaming, like I said, you're either limited usually by your CPU or your GPU at any given time. Now, at different times and in different games, you might be limited by one or the other. But like I said, oftentimes you are GPU limited in graphically demanding games with good new games with high-end graphics, which means that as long as your CPU is able to keep up with your GPU, a faster CPU does not make the game run faster. So a faster CPU only helps if you're CPU limited while gaming. And like I said, oftentimes that's not the case. So buying a CPU that's in a similar performance ballpark but costs a lot less is often a good way to go. Also, going down to a 6-core 12-thread chip as opposed to an 8-core 16-thread chip, a lot of people are a bit too hung up on, you need 8 cores for gaming. What you need is a certain level of performance. And fast 6-core 12-thread CPU often still does quite well in gaming performance, and many games don't benefit from the additional cores, and those that do oftentimes don't benefit much from them. And that's even while you're CPU limited, which you're not always going to be CPU limited. What I'm getting at here is, what if we go ahead and chuck the 13700K, which also means we need to change the motherboard, and may or may not need to change the RAM. We'll talk about that in a minute. So what if we looked at something like a 7600X, right? Reaching 95% of the performance for $217. Now, that's gaming performance. In productivity workloads, those additional cores on the 13700K could make a much bigger difference. But in gaming workloads, especially when you're GPU limited, you're going to get a very similar experience. And this also, like I said, changes the motherboard choice that you make. And the motherboards affect future upgradability. The motherboard needs to be compatible with your CPU, but oftentimes AMD or Intel will issue multiple future CPUs that will be compatible with that same motherboard socket. However, Intel's CPUs are at their end, their 14th gen chips here, are at the end of that motherboard's life cycle. That socket is done. You would need to buy a new motherboard to upgrade beyond that point. Now, I don't think future upgradability should be your primary decision-making factor in your build, but it is something you should at least weigh a little bit. And AMD's 7000 series CPUs just started a new motherboard socket, and so you'll get at least one more generation and possibly multiple new generations, which could give you much more upgradability down the line without having to rip out your whole motherboard, replace that, which is a huge hassle as well as a money sink. Also, some of you might be saying, didn't AMD just have an 8000 series of CPU? I should probably mention that. AMD's 8000G series CPUs are only interesting for their integrated graphics if you weren't going to buy a separate gaming graphics card. But we're going to be doing that at this price point. So when you're just using them as a gaming CPU and you're not using the integrated graphics for gaming, they are slower in performance than like the 7600X that I'm looking at in this video. Now, I should also mention, okay, so I kind of explained why I'm going the AMD route here for the upgradability. We're lowering the cost. I should mention that, again, you could go the Intel route if you prefer something like the 13400F. Could actually save you a bit of money here. But again, you're going to have less upgradability on that motherboard platform. And that's something to think about. And if you go with the F version, you're losing the integrated GPU, which can be useful for troubleshooting. If you go the 13400 without the F on it, you get the integrated graphics, but now your cost about the same as our 7600X, but you, like I said, lose that future upgradability. So for me, I'm thinking the 7600X makes sense. The 7600 non-X is often a better deal, but it looks like those are not in good supply at good prices right now. So that's why I'm going to go with the X version. The non-X version is within a couple percent of the speed. It's actually a little bit easier to cool and even comes with a stock cooler that you could use in a pinch if you're on a tight budget. So for now, that's why I'm going with the X version of the chip. I would go with the 7600 non-X if it was actually cheaper right now. Okay, so now we need a compatible motherboard for our CPU. So if we switch to choosing a motherboard, if you're on PC Part Picker, which is where I'm at right now, I'm not sponsored by them in any way, but it's just a convenient place to do this, and that's where I was sent the build list. It does survey a lot of major retailers in stock pricing, and you can sort prices low to high. And once you've locked in your CPU on PC Part Picker, it will only show you compatible CPUs, which is nice. But just sorting price low to high doesn't mean everything's created equal. So how do you choose a motherboard? Well, usually there's going to be just a few different actual chipsets for a compatible CPU. So for example, right now, for our 7000 series Ryzens, you've got A620, which is the lowest end chipset. You have B650s, which are a step up from there. And then you have, what do they call it, X670s, and you can see the chipsets behind my fat head right over here. And you could sort for those. X670s would be a step up from there. There's differences in overclocking ability going for the A620 to the B650s, and then going from the B650s to the X670s. You can get more like PCIe Gen 5 lanes, although there's like extreme editions. It can get kind of complicated. The biggest thing is all of these will support the CPU. There can be differences in how many USB ports you get, how many M.2 slots you get, how well the VRMs are cooled, which might matter if you're overclocking, all sorts of little details. Do you need a certain USB header for like a USB 3.2 header on the front of your case? Little details like that can matter. Do you want built-in Wi-Fi? Again, all of those little details can matter. But generally, if you just want to put together a gaming PC that will perform fine, the vast majority of the boards will support your CPU, they will work. And so if you don't need anything in particular beyond that, I'm not a big fan of overspending on the motherboard, but if you have certain features you want, make sure you get them. I'm also not a big fan of going all the way down to the A620 chipset, although again, you could do that if you need to shave a bit more money off the build. B650s are generally going to be fine. Now, there's going to be a whole bunch of different motherboard manufacturers of the chipsets. They might have differences in warranties, differences in customer service, and each board can be a little bit different. Now, I have not seen detailed reviews on every single one of these, but I have seen ASRock's B650M HDV M.2 has a number of M.2 slots, which is handy, and I believe this one was reviewed by Hardware Unboxed and had decent VRM cooling and fast boot times. It only has 2 memory slots, but I think that's all we need. Has some decent reviews right here, and it's only $120, which means compared to the cheapest B650, we're only $10 up. So I'm going to go with that one, but again, if you need certain features like built-in Wi-Fi, a different number of USB slots, all sorts of things, you could choose a different motherboard. Look up for those specific features that you're looking for. Now, by making these choices, you'll notice our build price has dropped, although I am also noticing it kind of lost the price on our GPU here. So I'll slot that back in so it's still part of our build price we're looking at here. Except the prices went up on 6800s all of a sudden. That's kind of strange. Okay, well, we'll just kind of remember that was there. We'll just chuck the video card for now. But we've shaved some money off the build. Now, a CPU cooler. Like I said, if you got the 7600 non-X, it comes with a stock cooler. Some other CPUs come with stock coolers, some don't. Stock coolers will run the CPUs okay, but they can be noisy, they can be a bit hot. You could always live with, but this one doesn't come with a stock cooler anyway. Now, this guy's build had an aftermarket cooler slotted in for $20. I don't know anything about this one in particular. It's possible it's totally fine. I will say that generally, Thermalright's like Peerless Assassins have gotten good reviews for the price. It's only about $33 right now, and I know this one's quality, so I'm gonna swap to this one, and we saved enough money on the CPU swap that we're still gonna be coming in at a total savings, and I think we've got a better cooler on the system now overall. Now, the CPU and motherboard that you choose also has an impact on the RAM choice. Also, when I was saying that you're always limited in performance by your CPU or your GPU, think about the RAM as working with your CPU. When you're looking up CPU performance like this, they're using a certain speed of RAM. If they had used slower RAM, results would change. If they had used faster RAM, results would change. So the RAM kind of think about it as helping out the CPU or hurting the CPU. But again, it's only going to factor in CPU limited situations. So unless you're going for some kind of ultra competitive esports build where you're always going to be CPU limited and you're just turning down all the graphics settings, I think some people overspend on RAM. But I actually don't think this person really did. I'll look at RAM prices right now. But in general, for a Ryzen CPU, DDR5 6000 speed memory is considered pretty good. Actually, kind of the best overall value for being easy to get running up to speeds, all of that. Now, in general, my thoughts on RAM if you're making this choice. I think you still want at least 2x16. That'll get you 32 gigabytes of RAM. Technically, 16 gigabytes can usually still work if you're not trying to multitask at all. But why would you want to be threading the needle like that and hurting the future use of the build as games use more RAM, as you want to do more with the PC? I think it's worth it to get the 32 gigabytes of RAM. Now, like I said, speed-wise, here, let me sort price low to high. So I've sorted for 2x16. Now, if you go slower RAM, there's two things that affect RAM. There's its speed and its latency, the CAS latency. Both of those things overall reduce the first word latency, which is what you really want to minimize here. So you can see that if we just sort prices low to high, there's some with, lower CAS latency and lower speed, but also lower speeds that come in like similar first word latency to something with faster speeds but higher latency. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and say DDR5 6000 is generally kind of the sweet spot. So I'm going to set that as a minimum filter for Ryzen 7000 series. Sorting prices low to high, I'm now just going to check if any latency speeds jump out to me, right? So the absolute cheapest here would have a 48 CAS latency. But if I spend just a little bit more, we can get a 30 on the CAS latency. That's a pretty big difference. So notice the total first word latency reducing from 16 down to 10, and we're only spending $5 to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and slot that in. Again, you could look at other brands. Another thing to think about with RAM is to run at these advertised speeds, they won't do that when you first plug them in. And again, highlighting some common PC building issues. One big mistake a lot of people make is they just plug in their RAM, PC's working fine. They never go in their BIOS on their motherboard and set the RAM to run at its advertised speeds. Now to do that, you enable a profile. For Intel, it's usually called an XMP profile. For AMD, it can be an Expo profile. Is it sometimes called a DocP profile as well, if I'm remembering right off the top of my head? And some RAM will be programmed to do like one or the other, and not necessarily both. So for the ease of a build, it can be nice to make sure that you're it's the one that's compatible with AMD or Intel system that you're building. Also, I will mention that motherboards will have a QVL list if you check their website. That's a qualified vendor list, and it will list specific RAM modules that have been verified to work well with your motherboard. That being said, usually if you buy RAM within the rated speeds for your motherboard, even if it's not on the QVL list, it will usually work fine. There's not a lot of risk there. But I will say, if you're extremely risk averse and you want to, want as little chance of anything not booting properly when you build your system, you could look at your motherboard's QVL list and buy RAM that's specifically on that list. But I think that's a bit overkill. I'm gonna go ahead and slot this one in. It's saving us a little bit of money compared to the one he had chosen, and it's the same speeds. Different brand though. Okay, so we've cut some more money off the build, just shaving out a little bit there. Okay, storage. These days you should definitely be buying an SSD. You should buy at least 1 terabyte, but game sizes are getting really big. Unless you're on an extremely tight budget, I recommend 2 terabytes or more. You could even go past that. However, if your motherboard has more than one M.2 slot, which I believe this one does, then you could have your build start out with 1 SSD that's maybe a bit smaller, and then you could add in more SSDs as needed in the future to keep your initial build price down. Now, that being said, people can still often spend too much to get a name brand. I like Samsung 980s, they're good SSDs, but you can buy a fast 2 terabyte SSD for less than $170. Usually. Let me go ahead and check what prices are looking like now. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna use our filters, and I'm gonna say that we want an SSD, and I want it to have at least 2,000 gigabytes, which would be about 2 terabytes. That should filter out things below that. But again, I'm gonna sort price low to high, and we'll talk about what we're looking at here. Hey, look, $97. However, notice that this is an SSD, but this is a SATA SSD, which will be slower than a fast NVMe drive. And it's usually not much more money to get a much faster drive compared to these SATA SSDs. Those would be useful if you were out of M.2 slots, right? And then you could still add in more storage. But if you're not out of M.2 slots and you've got to, why not use them, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at what's available here. So I'm seeing we've got a Silicon Power UD85, which is a PCIe 4.0 drive for $105. We've got Team Group MP33, that's a PCIe 3.0 drive for about $105. So it's looking like there are definitely some options here that aren't quite that same name brand, but they are a lot less money to get 2 terabytes of fast storage. And once you're beyond a certain point of speed, there's no evidence that it makes any real impact while gaming, right? And so that's the thing here. I'm gonna go ahead and compare speeds on a couple of these. So I'm gonna take a look at the MP33 from Team Group and the Silicon Power UD85. And we'll just take a quick glance at the speeds on these things. Newegg should have those listed. So the Team Group MP33, where is our speeds? Do we have our speeds listed here? Are they not listing the speeds? Where's our speeds, guys? Okay, maybe I'm just blind and I'm filming a video live, so I don't want to really waste your time. So we are going to go ahead and check the Amazon listing to see if they have that here. Here we go. 1800, 1500 read-write, that's up to. Does say it has some cache, which is good to have. There's also like SLC versus TLC versus like QLC, which can have differences in like longevity and speeds. Anyway, let's go ahead and compare it to this one. This one is claiming higher speeds at 3600, 2800 for about the same price. You know what? I think that seems like the better deal to me. Is this telling us if this is TLC or QLC? SLC caching, at least. Anyway, so it does look like that's going to be a faster drive at a fairly low price. And again, you could certainly make other choices here and spend a bit more on it. But we're gonna basically save $65 by not getting the name brand Samsung SSD here, and this one should still be fine. We're still getting 2 terabytes. Now, that brings us down to the video card choice. Now, again, the choice that they had made was an RX 6800, which is a great value choice. I think we've cut enough money that we can actually make some other potential choices here. And in fact, I almost want to put together the rest of the build and see how much money we have left. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, I'm noticing their case. Let's talk about cases for a minute. First of all, they're not overspending. $70 on a case, that's a fairly low budget. Cases, though, if they fit your parts, you know, they'll get the job done. With that in mind, to fit the parts, more size can be better unless you specifically need to fit into small form factor, which can be more complicated to do. Also, let's talk about case fans as well. So case fans, if your case comes with fans, it's usually going to be a better value than buying fans separately. Cases also have a big impact on the looks of your PC, and that's very personal preference. What I'm trying to get at here is the case is mostly personal preference, although value-wise, getting one that comes with fans so you don't have to buy them separately can save you money. Also, my personal preference is not to go with a micro mini tower unless I absolutely need to. Now, it's possible this builder really needed that, but I'm gonna drop the case fans and the case, and we're going to look at cases here. Now, depending on your budget, you can buy something really fancy looking and extravagant. You can also, like I said, just go for more like something pretty functional. I would look for a mesh front for airflow, comes with multiple fans, and I'd be pretty happy. I don't personally care for RGB, so I'd honestly rather just have like a black case with, maybe a window to look at my parts and no RGB. But again, it's very personal preference. They were kind of in that $70 price range. Looks like we could get the Montech Air 903 Max for a similar price. I think this one is a mid-tower, so this is going to be a bit bigger. Comes with 3 big fans, so we're not going to have to buy fans separately. And again, I'm going to say that this is basically a placeholder. Looks like they also have a Montex X3 mesh. I honestly don't know a whole heck of a lot about cases, guys, like the details of every single little case here. So this one would be a little bit less money. I don't really like the look of this this front panel, though. That looks a little bit kind of funky to me. I would spend the extra $10 to get the more just kind of flat-looking, boring design. I'm going to go ahead and slot this one in as mostly just kind of a placeholder. You can choose a completely different case. Again, try to get a mesh front for airflow and have it come with fans so you don't need to buy them separately. Oftentimes on the cheap RGB fans, they're oftentimes not addressable RGB, meaning you can't control them through software. Sometimes they just have preset settings. Personally, my preference would be turn them off anyway. So again, you could spend more on RGB and plan that out a little bit better if you wanted to. Okay, now we've got the power supply. The power supply is important, but I also find people can often overdo this. Now, if you're gonna one thing about power supplies though, is they're often good for a lot longer than the rest of your PC. If you buy a high quality, high performance power supply now, this might last you a decade, like several, PC upgrades, which does have a lot going for it. But in the moment, you probably mostly care about how does your PC do right now. And one other nice thing I'll mention about us switching off the 13700K and going with the Ryzen, it draws a lot less power. So I don't think we need an 850 watt power supply if we could find one for less money. Also, you do want to make sure you're not buying the cheapest power supply on the market that is just going to be a, because the power supply is the one thing in your PC that could actually just like kill your PC. If you get some kind of weird power surge that actually just fries components. Now, I don't think that's as common as it used to be. So I think there's more fear on that than there needs to be, but I'm not saying you shouldn't be careful. or spend a bit more for a bit more quality. What I'm showing you guys right now is the Cultists Network PSU tier list. And this website, I'll include links in the video description. This is a great place to look up the tier list for a power supply. It doesn't have everything, but if you're quickly making comparisons, you can kind of like, Control F, type in the power supply you're looking for, and maybe it pops up here. For example, the one we're looking at in this build is probably rated pretty high. Seasonic generally has good warranties and good power supplies, although certain ones are not always up to their usual standard. But let's look for Seasonic Focus in this tier list. So I'm just gonna go Seasonic let's see, maybe if I just type in Focus, it would pop up. Seasonic Focus, is popping up here. What kind of tier list are we on? We're on tier A high end. So again, that looks like a pretty good power supply, most likely. However, could we get a reasonable power supply for less than $125 that could fit this build? That's what I'm kind of looking at now. So let's go ahead and do that. So power supplies, right here, I'm seeing a 80 plus gold Corsair, which is another good brand, for $100. So we could, it's 750 watts instead of 850 watts. That's probably fine for our build, depending on the GPU we go with, but we're probably not gonna go too crazy at this price point. Now, you could sort prices low to high, but then you're gonna wanna get yourself a few filters here. 80 plus gold, and platinum and titanium, those aren't actually quality ratings. They're energy efficiency ratings, so they don't completely filter out all the garbage, but they help. Because if they didn't even bother to get that kind of a rating, they're probably not great. Although honestly, even bronze could be fine. Wattage-wise, they had 850 watt minimum. I honestly think we could probably be fine at 650 watts, although spending a bit more if we wanted to. So let's put on those filters. Okay, so now we get some Apevia, which is generally, I think, not considered as high-end of a brand. If we go ahead and search the tier list for Apevia, I don't know if they'll all even be on here. It looks like the Prestige models are listed as a tier C low-end, and it's a speculative position. And if I search further down, the tier E avoid list has an Apevia Jupiter on it. Not all of these are showing up on the tier list, so I'll say, and even the ones that were on there, like the Prestige, that was speculative positioning. So for me personally, I'm gonna say I'd pay a little bit more to find something I know a little bit more about. Let's go ahead and see what a little bit more money might get us. Okay, we've got some like MSIs on here that might be fine. We could check the tier list. Again, they were spending $125, so we can cut their budget and still spend on a decent option here. Again, feel free to search all the details. I'm just kind of scrolling down a bit to see what's available if we were to spend a little bit more. Looks like there's a lot of options here. We can even, if we want to stay at an 850 watt, I'm pretty sure the Cooler Master MWE is probably fine. Let's go ahead and actually check the, what if I just search MWE? Does that pop things up here? Cooler Master MWE V2 is tier C. Are we seeing other ones listed anywhere else? So it looks like it can, so the MWE Gold is up here at, this is a speculative tier B. So again, it's probably fine. So I'm gonna go ahead and say, hey, we're gonna save some money on that. We're still at 850 watts, and I'm gonna say that's still kind of overkill. You could have saved, another 20 bucks on the build by dropping to something either even lower. One thing I like here though, is that this is gonna support higher end CPUs and GPUs as upgrades in the future. Like I said, upgradability shouldn't be the primary thing in your thought process when you're building, but it should be on your mind when you're building, right? Just not your primary decision making. But spend a little bit more to get a lot more upgradability in the future. can be a reasonable thing to do. All right, the last thing left is the video card. We're at $734, and they had an RX 6800. So let's take a look at that. So it looks like the 6800s are back on the list here. It looks like there's some available at $380. And if I go ahead and slot that in, check this out. We're at $1,100. And our GPU performance is identical to their original build. Our CPU performance is very similar in gaming workloads, but again, in productivity workloads where all those cores could have been put to work, their original 13700K would be an upgrade for productivity workloads. Do keep that in mind. But in gaming situations where you're likely GPU limited, we basically shaved $400 off the build. This is a screenshot of the original build. Like I said, we've shaved off $400, and I'd say we're going to have an almost identical gaming experience. That's pretty cool. Now, here's the other thing that's pretty cool. If you had $400 more to spend because of all of these changes, what would you dump the money into? You've got two options you can go down now. Do you want to increase your CPU performance, or do you want to increase your GPU performance? Now, like I said, you're often going to be GPU limited. So I think for most people in most situations, you're going to want to increase the GPU performance if your CPU is already pretty solid, which we've got here. That being said, we do have enough room in our budget for the highest end gaming CPU on the market right now, which is the AMD 7800X3D. And one thing that's awesome about it compared to going with like an Intel 14900K, which would be fairly similar in gaming performance, a lot higher in productivity, but similar in gaming performance, is that the Intel option requires a lot more power, would require a much better cooler. But with the AMD 7800X3D, which we could drop in here, I'll just show it as an example. If we did want to drop in the 7800X3D, we are still coming in under budget. We're under $1,300 now, and this is the best gaming CPU on the market. 14900K competes pretty well with it. Some games, one's better than the other. Most reviews have this on average a few percent faster. Pretty much equivalent though. But again, it's compatible with a cheap CPU cooler like this, guys, and we don't need to think much more about our cooling or our power supply or anything. That being said, I think we could get a bigger bang for the buck in most gaming workloads by keeping the 7600X and increasing the GPU performance. So if we go ahead and do that, we can go up from here. Now, by the way, I will mention, I think the 6800 is a very good bang for the buck right now. If you have to buy around the $400 price point on a GPU, it has 16 gigabytes of VRAM. It compared to something like the 7700X, the 7700 XT from AMD, which is about the same performance from the current generation from AMD. It actually has less VRAM though, at 12 gigabytes instead of the 16 on the 6800, and it's $40 more expensive. So for value at this price point, I actually think the RX 6800, while it's still on the market for under $400, is a very good choice right there. Now, we have a lot more money to spend though. So NVIDIA recently released their Super Series lineups, and the 4070 Super is, if we're talking value-wise, most performance per dollar, the best value from that lineup. And it comes in at about $600 right now. Some are available for about $10 below MSRP at $590. Now, this will be 12 gigabytes of VRAM instead of 16. If you want to stick with AMD and get a 16 gigabyte VRAM option for a similar price point, the 7900 GRE recently launched at $550. It has 16 gigabytes of VRAM, and it can often perform similarly to the 4070 Super. The 4070 Super has NVIDIA's better upscaler, which is quite useful in a lot of situations. As the GPUs age, I think NVIDIA's upscaler will help, but AMD's additional VRAM will help, and there is a bit of a trade-off there. I'm going to go ahead and slot in the 4070 Super, but I am going to say you could definitely get the 7900 GRE instead, save yourself $30, and still get a very similar gaming experience with more VRAM if you prefer. Watch some of my other more GPU-focused videos for more in-depth thought on that. Guys, we are still $180 under the original budget, right? That's pretty crazy. So with that in mind, we could step up the GPU even further. Now, here's the thing. If you want to get 16 gigabytes of VRAM on a powerful GPU, so not the 4060 Ti and from NVIDIA, you'd have to go up to the 4070 Ti Super, which would get you the 16 gigabytes of VRAM. That's going to be $800 though. Now, that being said, $1,530. Guys, we are only $20 above the original build at $1,510, right? We're only $20 above that original build, which is kind of crazy if you look at it because, again, differences in a lot of small differences, but we're ending up with a almost this is not far behind a 4080. Right? So you're getting a pretty interesting option here. And again, you could go an AMD route here, go with something like the 7900 XT if you prefer. Once we're talking 4070 Ti Super levels of performance though, I think ray tracing performance with heavy duty ray tracing can start to be an experience that you're looking for there. And that could be pretty interesting. Anyway, so if we were gonna spend $1,500 on a build, I would try to get in, like I said, a much better GPU by shaving back all those other things we talked about in the system. Again, another route you could have gone here is going with the 7800X 3D and paring back the GPU a little bit. But I'd probably go this route and then maybe upgrade the 7600X in another generation or two of Ryzen processors if you really feel like that starts to hold you back in time. All right, this video is extremely long, so we're gonna end it here. Huge thank you to viewers, subscribers, commenters, channel members who click the join button to directly fund the channel financially. That's absolutely amazing. Thank you for those of you who can do that. Totally understand if that doesn't fit into your budget. And you do get little member badges and early access to some videos and all of that. So anyway, hope you guys found this video useful and or interesting. Try to go through the whole thought process, not just the specific parts. And again, remember, all of these parts are placeholders. You can change them if you understand the choices that we made. I hope all of you have an excellent day.